Southern Ocean Exploration is the most successful shipwreck discovery team in Australia. Over the last decade, their discoveries have reignited national interest in our maritime history.
The search that we're going to be doing today is for the SS Glenelg.
Team leader Mark Ryan is preparing his crew for a new mission to find the SS Glenelg, a 210-ton iron steamer that disappeared in Bass Strait in March 1900.
There were 7 children on board. It's interesting to note that 45 children lost their parents when this ship went down. So we need to be respectful of that.
If SOE finds the Glenelg today, Ryan will be happy to notch another discovery to the list before moving on to the next wreck. But little does he know that today's expedition will have profound effects on people he's never met and will ultimately force him to reconsider his work as a shipwreck hunter. For over a century, the sinking of the Glenelg has haunted the families of its victims. Many of them still agonise about the deaths of their relatives on that tragic night in 1900.
On the 25th of March 1900, the Glenelg was making a routine trip from Bairnsdale to Melbourne.
The Glenelg left Bairnsdale in the afternoon and sailed down to Lakes Entrance, and from there left about 7 o'clock at night to head out to sea to go around Wilson's Promontory back to Melbourne.
It's documented that they had quite a party the night before.
They would have been beautifully dressed. They'd have been having a great time, I suspect. And then there would have been a moment.
4 o'clock in the morning, a storm. Would have been pretty scary, very dark.
Seas were very rough. It was taking on a lot of water very quickly.
Suddenly somebody reported that there was water in the ship. The engineer tried to find where the water was coming from, took with an axe to some of the bulkheads, but they found that there was just far too much.
They would have been trying to lower the lifeboats and people scrambling to those.
The crew were in one lifeboat that moved away from the ship before any of the passengers could climb aboard, and then most of them tried to find space in the other boat, but there were far too many people.
It would have been incredibly dark, and that would have been terrifying and frightening for those people on board.
They were really rocked into waking up after a long night of celebrations, and I think this may have contributed to the fact that no one really had their wits about them.
Because of the bad conditions, there was great loss of life. 31 people died and only 3 survived.
And it really conjures up horrific last half an hour, I think. Storms, pitch black, in the middle of the ocean, looking for family. It's a pretty scary ending.
After the ship went down, there were only 3 of the crew in one of the lifeboats, and they rowed the lifeboat along the coast. The youngest of them was unhappy with the way that the other 2 were going, and he demanded to be put ashore, and they rowed to the shore and put him on the beach. And then the older 2 went back to sea and continued rowing along the coast. Eventually they arrived at Marlow, which was a long way from where the ship went down, and it's from them that we get the stories of what happened on the ship.
We've got a shot on the side, and we're going to get bounce divers to go down and have a look. We're going to go and do that right now.
Southern Ocean Exploration is all about exploration, education and preservation. It's part of the education that we get the general public to understand that these sites are a part of our history and need to be preserved.
In the last 10 years, we've gone from being a group of recreational divers just going out for a dive and a bit of an adventure to becoming more mainstream, serious maritime archaeologists and more concerned about preserving our maritime history.
Australia in general, but Victoria in particular, is a very maritime-based state, and we were built up on our maritime history, and we only have a small amount of it. And if we lose it because we don't look after it properly, then it's something that we can never regain.
What we are visiting is grave sites. These, like on the Glenelg, there was over 30 people died on that. It should be respected as such.
My great-grandfather, David Fife, was the chief engineer on the SS Glenelg. He was born in Kirkcaldy in Scotland. He had a wife and 3 surviving children. He was 45 when he died, The sinking of the Glenelg was always a prominent part of our family folklore. We were always told how brave and heroic my great-grandfather was when the Glenelg sunk.
We'd always grown up with the idea that grandmother was the stewardess on a ship that had foundered off Lakes Entrance. This picture shows Janet Boyd as about a 20-year-old, I imagine.
My grandfather was Arthur Malden, and he lost his life on a ship called Glenelg. He was one of many that lost their lives that day when it was sunk.
My great-grandfather, Thomas John Stevens, his daughter Lily Ethel, his wife's brother John Lillycrap, and also his stepdaughter Anna went on a week's holiday to Gippsland Lakes, and tragedy struck.
From all the accounts that I've read, he was a man that loved life. The wreck of the Glenelg was something from a very young age I remember the family talking about. It knocked the Boer War, off the front page, as it were, of the paper. So we knew that it was very big.
It was very fortunate that more of the family didn't go, but in another way, of course, it changed history for us.
I first teamed up with SOE when we were looking for the Karamba, and it wasn't long after that we discovered the SS Alert, and that was one of the biggest thrills I've ever had. The next ship we went looking for was the SS Glenelg, and PT had done a lot of work already on where we thought that one might be.
Most divers don't get a thrill out of research, but that's the big part of it for me. I like getting in the archives, finding a document that hasn't been seen or read for 50, 60, 100 years, and being the first to see it.
We visited graveyards, talked to the relatives, looked up old newspapers and read the Marine Inquiry, and we looked for any obscure detail we could on the history of the Glenelg.
I use what I call a shipwreck matrix, where I gather as much information as what I can on the site. I use World War II records. I use a bit of shipping knowledge.
Ian Boyd, a relative of Janet Boyd, the stewardess on the Glenelg, had been researching the story for 10 years, and his research was tremendous, and that provided most of the information to piece together the final moments of what happened to the SS Glenelg.
The main challenges that we face are gathering the information, and that's why it's important that we have Martin Tozer and Peter Taylor doing the work that they do.
The most valuable snippet I found for the Glenelg was the speed the boat was travelling. I knew how long from the survivors. They steamed for so many hours, and I just did the calculations, and I came up with a distance of roughly 55, 56 nautical miles from Lakes Entrance. It couldn't be anywhere else.
We've had a really good hit, put the line in, but the current's so strong it's dragged the line.
The day was superb, such a contrast to the night when the SS Glenelg sunk. The sea was dead calm, glorious sunshine, but one thing was there was a real hell of a current racing through that area.
Okay, so as you can see, the current's quite strong. If you just take a look at that buoy there and the way that the water's running.
We were beginning to think there was going to be another fruitless search. The only good sign, I suppose, was we had a lone seal that kept jumping up to the surface. Now, the only reason you'd have a seal out that area is if there was a wreck or a reef somewhere in the vicinity.
I extended the search for a couple hundred metres either side of the grid, and then on one pass we just ran right over the top of it. It was quite extraordinary.
Suddenly we looked up, and on the depth sounder, here was this big shape.
That's what we want to see.
Someone yelled out, "Have a look at that!" And everyone in the boat just swung around to the depth sounder, and it was very clear to us straight away that that was the ship's boiler.
I was quite concerned about putting divers in the water.
Go! Go! Go!
John, one of the divers, got swept away almost as soon as he got in, and I had to send a boat to go and pick him up. Fortunately, George Theodorovic, our bounce diver, was able to fight his way through the current and make it down to the wreck. He'd sent up the orange lift bag, and that's our signal that he's on the rust.
The SMB's just come up. That's a surface marker buoy. George has inflated that from the bottom. It's not attached just to a lead weight. It's come to the surface just to let us know that there's something there on the bottom. So it looks like the SS Glenelg.
That's good, guys.
pretty knackered by the time I get there, but when I saw it, I don't know, it was the excitement or the tiredness. I was puffing and burning through gas, but I couldn't wait to send the boy up.
Yeah, it's just like somebody's guiding you, steering you in the right direction. Like, it's hard to explain, but it's happened a number of times.
As divers, generally the most important thing to us is to get to actually dive on the wreck. However, the more we work on the wrecks, the more the story of the wreck itself and the ship itself comes out.
My great-grandfather, TJ, was found in a shocking condition. And of course, Anna Lynch, who also died, her husband had to identify him. So I could imagine the horror that he must have felt, actually only able to identify him by the ring that he was wearing on his finger. He was so badly disfigured.
Lily Ethel May was never found, unfortunately. Also, Alan's brother was never found as well.
David Fife was thoroughly professional, very skilled, very experienced, and a very strong sense of duty.
I don't think he would have dreamed of jumping off and saving himself first. It was just the person that he was.
He stayed on the vessel knowing that he was facing certain death.
I'm very proud that he did what he could for the passengers before the ship went down.
Did they die on board, or did they get a certain distance away in one of the lifeboats and then the lifeboat was swamped and they died? Where did Lily and Anna Lynch, where did they finish up? Where were they really? Yeah.
I couldn't wait to get in the water. It's just going to be incredible to see something that no one had ever seen for over 100 years. An entire ecosystem has grown over the wreck, from soft coral, sponges and anemones to all sorts of fish life and crayfish and seals as well. It really is an oasis in a desert out there, because in that area of Bass Strait there is nothing else around for many, many kilometres.
She was a treasure chest of relics, not your gold and silver, but bottles and plates, the bric-a-brac of real lives, which in a way is a lot more valuable.
It's a very beautiful site, very, very colourful, but it's also quite eerie when you consider how many people have actually died there.
Glenelg has been very fortunate to us. We did find it on the second trip, which is quite extraordinary. We've spent years searching for other wreck sites and haven't found them yet. And be able to go out on the second search and be able to run right over the top of it, it's just like somebody was looking over our shoulder that day.
It's worth the way to go. It's beautiful.
Take off, that is what it's all about.
What a dive.
In much better condition than I thought it would be.
It's a real ship, mate. We found the Glenelg today. It's in very good condition.
Drag yourself hand over hand down the line. Try and descend as quickly as you can.
Quite murky water, so it's very gloomy when you get down the bottom, and then out of the gloom you start to see the structure of the ship and the ribs and the steel, and we saw the boiler. Oh, yeah, very exciting, very exciting.
The bow is all in good condition because it's quite strong. The stern had collapsed a bit. It appeared to me that it may have gone down sort of stern first by the way it crashed into the bottom.
Lots of stuff on it. Can't believe the amount of champagne bottles. Plates, there was crayfish. It was an incredible dive. Fantastic.
Really beautiful wreck, covered in a lot of soft corals and sponges and things like that. Lots of fish life. Plates, bottles, the whole lot. Yeah, it's great.
The reason why Heritage Victoria asked us to raise the plate is because it has the ship's logo here. So this is going to help give us positive identification of the wreck.
It was difficult to know how to feel. On the one hand, we've just solved a 100-year-old mystery, but then very soon after, all the relatives started contacting us. And they were telling us really harrowing and upsetting stories about what happened to those people on that day the Glenelg sank.
My great-grandmother had 3 children and they virtually were left pretty well destitute.
They tried to get compensation too, you know, because she had 3 children. But they couldn't get anything at all.
My great-grandmother had to take in laundry to try and support them because there was no Centrelink or social security benefit in those days.
She battled on somehow and brought the children up, but it must have been quite a battle.
Edith Daniels, Arthur Malden's wife, would have had a very hard life. She scrubbed floors, she did housework. She was a very tough old lady. We met her quite a few times for afternoon tea. Very fussy.
TJ's eldest son was 15 years old and his younger son, my grandfather, was 4 years old. So you can imagine for the family the complications there with just the breadwinner all of a sudden not there.
I can't imagine what it would have been like for Alan having lost all of those people in one day.
Well, I think the trauma of having to bury the family and associated with like never finding a few of the bodies was very, very traumatic from what I can gather. In fact, obsessively so.
Nellie Nolan, who was a daughter of TJ, we were very close to her growing up. Every month she took us to the Melbourne General Cemetery, which is where TJ is buried, and she would talk about the loss that it was. And she was obviously very affected by her father's death. In contrast to that, my grandfather, Thomas George, who was only 4 when the Glenelg happened, he didn't grow up with a father. So he never, ever spoke about TJ. So I had an aunt who spoke about him all the time, and I had a grandfather who I can't ever remember ever saying anything about his father. And I guess why would he? He wouldn't have any memory of his father being only 4.
I'm aware there are some suggestions that he was worried about the state of the vessel. We clearly can't know after all these years whether there was any substance to those allegations.
I think being the first-rate engineer that he was, I think he would have been well aware of any deficiencies in the seaworthiness of the ship, but I think he would have been in a catch-22 situation. It would have been difficult for him to challenge the ship company.
It's also interesting that a former assistant engineer on the vessel refused to sail on it. However, the captain of the vessel was happy for his daughters to sail on it.
He was reputed to have told a stewardess on the ship that it was a floating coffin, and yet he was powerless to do anything about it.
Why did some people survive and why did some people not survive?
One would hope that the inquiry was objective and took into account all the facts, but it's also hard to discount the huge public outcry at the time.
The 3 men that jumped into the boat, how were they in a position to do that? Did the lifebelts work? The inquest seemed to be saying, well, they weren't the best, although they seemed to scoot around that sort of issue.
I think it just makes it all more tragic because the accident was preventable, most probably.
Some of those things that were skirted around back then would have been quite central to an inquest today.
Divers have discovered the wreckage of a ship missing off Victoria's coast for more than 100 years. It's believed to be that of the iron steamer Glenelg, which sank during a regular coastal run between Bairnsdale and Melbourne in 1900.
Well, my reaction to finding the Glenelg on the television was amazing because it's put 35 years of searching for Arthur Malden together. It now has a resting place, which is so beautiful. Well, I hope he's there anyway.
I was reading the Canberra Times and I turned over the page and there it was, the SS Glenelg. I couldn't believe it.
When I first saw photos of it, it looked beautiful. You know, the shots underwater, and yes, there was the hull of the ship and, you know, all of those things, and you looked at it and you thought, how beautiful. And there was a match between how beautiful that was and Lily, who sleeps beneath the waves, which I'd been brought up on.
The instant I heard it, the first thing I thought was there a body? You know, so I think I'd been really deep in my subconscious was the fact that I knew that that little girl had never been found.
Ian's mobile phone went and I saw him speaking in great earnest.
Oh, the news that the Glenelg had been found was very moving for me.
I went and popped my arm around him and said, "Who is it? What has happened?" assuming that someone perhaps near to us had passed away. And he just said, "They found the Glenelg after 109 years." And he burst into tears, but it was tears of excitement and tears of joy, almost relief.
I was thrilled. I didn't know that anyone was actually looking for it. I was terribly excited, wondering what the implications were, what else we would find out about the Glenelg now the wreck had been discovered. The mystery of my great-grandfather's final resting place had now been solved.
I just wish my father could have been here, because that would have just been the highlight of his life, I think, if he could have heard the news along with us.
You want to know where you've come from, you want to know who you are, and this wreck of the Glenelg has been a constant with us over generations, but always talked about in bits and pieces. So finally, through this process, where we actually are able to find out so much about who we are as people, and I think that's really, really important, and important then going forward for our children, the next generation.
We invited the relatives to a pub in Melbourne. About 100 of them turned up, many of wondering whatever happened to their ancestors. This was a big occasion for the boys from SOE.
We were dumbfounded. The emotion on that night really made us think about what we were doing.
Words cannot express my appreciation to Mark and the team. If not for Mark, I would not have been a party to this remarkable journey that we have all been on since the discovery of the Glenelg. If not for the work of Mark and the team, I would not have been prompted to revisit the information.
At that moment, we realised that discovering the past brings heavy responsibilities. We really need to treat these stories with the respect that they deserve.
That night, Gordon Fife asked me about diving the site and what it would take for him to visit the wreck. I was cautious at first, but told him I could do the training with him if he was serious.
I'm terribly excited at the prospect of visiting the site of the sinking of the Glenelg, and I'm very grateful to the people who are making it possible.
3 months later, he and his wife Liz were in Port Phillip Bay doing their open water training.
You have to admire Gordon. Here's a guy who hasn't been to the beach for over 30 years and he's now getting some real hardcore diving. The day Gordon and his wife Liz dived the Glenelg was a lot like the day we found it. It was very flat and sunny, but the current was a lot less fierce.
Yeah, I think I put myself under a fair bit of pressure. I think technically I know I can do it.
Down there and swing your feet over.
But I want to do the right thing in paying tribute to the memory of my grandfather. So I want things to go smoothly.
And we're going to go on 3 all.
It's just a matter of overcoming all those fears of doing something that doesn't come naturally. So
You ready, Gordon? We're going together, remember?
it's been a very intense week, physically, mentally and emotionally. Now I'm actually going to go down and see firsthand the ship that my great-grandfather went down on.
1, 2, 3, and go!
I've come down here barely able to swim. I'm now faced with the prospect of diving 30 metres. I visit the grave of my father, I visit the grave of my grandparents, and now I'll be able to visit the final resting place of my great-grandfather.
It was so good down there. It was fantastic.
That's amazing. Just amazing. It was an incredible experience in itself, but they're just so beautiful. Like, I expected to come away all sombre, but it's just one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. And it's amazing such beauty can come out of such tragedy. But it's just absolutely exquisite.
It worked out really well. Fantastic. Well done, guys. Well done, Liz.
Thank you.
Getting down.
Thank you.
Great job.
Thanks for everything.
Thanks, pal.
Really appreciate it.
Enjoyed it. It was a fantastic dive. It was like a resolution of sorts, and it confirmed to me that our approach to maritime archaeology was correct. It's all about the families.
About 12 months after we found the Glenelg, a group of SOE guys went back to complete some more of the site survey. And after they got back, we got a phone call saying that a lot of the relics had been stolen from the wreck.
Divers who looted a historic shipwreck site off the Victorian coast have been described as grave robbers.
When I found out that Glenelg had been robbed, I was almost in tears. I thought, how could anybody be so insensitive through a sacrilegious place like that, where it's a graveyard?
My initial reaction was it would be no different than going down and finding TJ's grave destroyed. So it felt very personal, and I felt very violated.
That was a real kick in the guts. You know, these people had gone out and stolen our history.
The items aren't worth anything, but they're worth a lot when they're in situ, and I can't see any reason at all for removing material and just put on your bookshelf somewhere.
Surely any person would realise that this is part of history, firstly, and secondly, this is part of someone's family. This is the grave. This is Lily Ethel May's grave.
I began to wonder if in fact we were doing the right thing, whether we were doing more harm than good. I asked myself, what's the point of finding these wrecks if somebody else can just come along and destroy them?
I was concerned that, Mark started to have reservations about what we're doing, and this could be the end of SOE.
I seriously considered stopping the work that we were doing.
I knew I had to convince Mark to keep going. After seeing the reaction from the relatives and other archaeologists, I knew this work was just too important to stop after just one incident.
The relatives convinced me of the importance of the work that we do. We're the only group that is successfully looking for shipwrecks in Bass Strait. There are still over 600 to be found. If we don't find these ships and tell their stories, who will? The ships will just rust away under the sea.